Uganda has made the first of 5 annual payments to the Democratic Republic of the Congo as reparations for losses its troops caused during conflicts and occupations that lasted from 1998 to 2003. There are many questions arising from the payment. How sustainable are they, and where will Uganda get the money from? We'll see if we can get some answers. Small and medium-sized businesses are the heart of many, if not all, economies. These businesses contribute to GDPs and employ large parts of the working population. But many struggle with when and how to scale up their business operations. And then from SMEs, we'll talk inflation. Every day, there is a headline about the rising cost of living, global inflation, and the potential for a global recession. Central banks, led by the U.S. Fed, have responded by rising interest rates, which doesn't look like it's actually paying off. That gives you an idea of what you can expect on today's Business Edge. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Let's start with African business headlines. Now, more than 2,000 Nigerian investors have petitioned Kenyan courts to unfreeze 1.4 billion Kenyan shillings locked in Safaricom and 4 banks, saying they were swindled in transactions involving Africa-focused payments giant Flutterwave. The Nigerians said in the petition that they had lost billions of Kenyan shillings through a sports betting platform that used Flutterwave to process its payments. The Nigerian government says it hopes to increase electricity supply in the country to a minimum of 7,000 megawatts with the supply of new power equipment from Siemens. The managing director and chief executive officer of FGN Power Company, Kenny Anue, said that the first set of the equipment arrived in Nigeria just over a week ago and will be unveiled in Lagos in the 3rd week of October. And for more electricity conversations, but now across the continent, KenGen has lost its bid to have a judge throw out a case filed by a land-buying company in Navasha over a disputed 3,000-acre parcel acquired for geothermal drilling over a decade ago. Justice Mwangi Njoroge of the Environment and Land Court in Nakuru struck out the application by the state-owned power generator, saying an earlier suit brought by the disgruntled members of Ngati Farmers Cooperative Society was not determined on merit. And still more energy conversations. South Africa has signed the first of 3 agreements to increase its renewable energy supplies and reduce reliance on coal-fired power stations. Mineral Resources and Energy Minister Gwede Matashe on Thursday led the deal-signing event with independent producers to supply wind energy. The country is enduring acute energy shortages, with its state energy provider Eskom suffering from a lack of investment amid allegations of corruption. And finally, Eskom says it will continue to cut 5,000 megawatts of electricity capacity from the national grid until at least 5 a.m. on September the 24th. The spokesman for the company said Eskom will release the outlook for load shedding for the rest of the weekend and for next week later on Friday afternoon. And those are a few headlines. When we come back, we're in East Africa, where Uganda has started reparations to the tune of $65 million this year for repayment to the DRC. What are the details? We'll have those after the break. Uganda has now made its first war reparations payment of $65 million to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. This is the first of 5 annual payments to the DRC for losses Ugandan troops caused during wars and occupations from 1998 to 2003. Uganda's payment to the DRC follows a ruling by the International Court of Justice earlier this year, ordering Uganda to pay $325 million as restitution for looting the DRC's mineral resources, resulting in the loss of lives and damage to the country's economy. Now, Uganda's Ministry of Finance spokesperson Apollo Muhinda said the first payment is a gesture by Uganda that it is willing to pay the amount set aside by the court. But there have been questions as to how sustainable the payments will be, and Uganda's economy right now is in a precarious position. And what will paying $325 billion do to it? Joining me to discuss this from Washington, D.C. is Stephen Hayes. He's the President Emeritus of the Corporate Council on Africa. Stephen, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Good morning to you too, Tony.
So while this is a very sort of political conversation, there has very interesting economic and monetary attachments to it. So let's initially start with the request. The DRC had asked the International Criminal Court to compel Uganda to pay $11 billion, right, but the final judgment has come to about $325 billion. So how did the judgment, rather million, I beg your pardon, how did the judgment move from $11 billion to this $325 million?
Well, I think it was clear that Uganda could not pay $11 billion, and the criminal court, the Court of Justice had asked DRC and Uganda to try to work it out. DRC did notify the Court of Justice that things were stalled, and therefore the International Court of Justice stepped in again, looked at things and agreed that the $325 million or $65 million a year would be paid over a five-year period. I think it was just a realization that Uganda would not be able to pay what was really deemed the true cost of the war to DRC.
So stemming from that, if we say that Uganda wasn't able to pay the $11 billion, how sure are we that Uganda will be able to pay the $325 million? Because initially, Uganda had said it would not be able to make the annual payment. So what happens if after the first, the second, the third, Uganda says that's all we have?
Well, I think Uganda will be able to pay. They've made a very positive first step. I think that also, if I may, I think it's a bargain for Uganda, very frankly, given the damage, but also given the enormous amount of resources that are still going to Uganda from DRC. It's a bargain, and that's why I say it's a bargain, because they take about, the estimate is about 20, I think it's 20 tons a year of gold alone goes through Uganda from DRC. You look at that, that's nearly $2 billion. Now, does it all go through the government? No, it doesn't. It's smuggled out largely. Uganda is a large seller of gold now, but they have hardly any gold. So almost all of it, 95% is the estimate, comes out of DRC alone. So clearly, paying $65 million a year is a bargain, and basically, given that they're taking, at least in gold alone, $2 billion. The problem is too that there are also groups of terrorists that's still bothering Uganda, harassing, also as well as Rwanda for that matter, and so Uganda has sent troops back into DRC. Supposedly they're withdrawing now, but that's also comes at a cost. And DRC gave them permission to move in, so they're getting quite a bit of money for quite a bit of value for the money that they're paying. And given the amount of resources that are going through Uganda, I think they'll be able to pay over the five-year period. I think it's an extraordinary bargain, and if I can put it that way, for Uganda.
Okay, so you bring me to my next question. We can see how things are sort of playing out on the Ugandan end, but the reparations are for deaths, looting, and general economic damage caused by Uganda's military occupation. So let's look at how this may have affected the DRC's economy. What do you think about it in terms of the socioeconomic effects of this occupation on the DRC? Did it stagnate the economy? How much of the impact can we say is back to where we see the DRC right now?
Well, I think it destroyed, not quite totally, but it just devastated the Eastern Congo. And part of it's for deaths, part of it is for property damage, and part of it is for essentially environmental looting and damage. It has really damaged, on just one example, the Virunga National Park, which is one of the largest national parks in the world. It is the largest national park in Africa, and it's the size of Belgium. Has been damaged extensively. Resources have been looted. And so the damage to the region is just extensive. I think it's going to take decades, I think, for it to come back in the way it's been destroyed, especially given that you still have a number of so-called terrorist groups or militant groups still at large throughout that region. Some of them are supported by Uganda, some of them are supported by Rwanda, some of them are supported by DRC, and they're the major source of looting. And so to be able to loot, you've also got to terrorize the population. So I think it's still an issue that's going to have to be resolved.
So, Stephen, let me ask this. While you say you believe that Uganda can make these payments, given some of the things that you laid out, let's look at the economic situation of the country. This is also coming at a time where the official economy, let me use that phrase, is struggling. We've seen an increase, of course, in the cost of living, which is happening across the continent around the world. Inflation has recently also exceeded the target of the annual core inflation of 5% set by their bank. Cost of living skyrocketed, and you also have a plunge of coffee exports, which is a main exports and revenue generator for Uganda, by 29% in August because of this devastating drought that the country is facing. Are there not going to be economic effects or consequences for Uganda having to pay $65 million a year to the DRC?
I agree with those facts that you just laid out. I think they're accurate. I also think that the hidden economy is far greater than the official economy. I think Uganda is going to have to decide how to decide whatever. They're going to have to get a hold of the underground economy. The problem is that a lot of the smuggling couldn't happen without some official support. So they're going to have to figure out how much they can control the underground economy, which is far greater than the stated economy. On the face of it now, you're absolutely right. The government is going to have a hard time paying $65 million a year out without the underground economy, the so-called underground economy, which is literal too, since most of it is taken out of mining out of the DRC, and it's still going on. Those reparations are from 1998 to 2003, as you said earlier. But keep in mind that billions are taken out every year, and it goes through Uganda. So can they pay? Yes, but will it be very difficult under the present system? Yes, it will be, and it's going to be very taxing, literally. So they're going to have to take control of the minerals and the goods, the timber also that is coming out of Congo, and it goes through and out of Uganda, most of it.
So on the flip side of this, what do we say about the money coming into the DRC? There are families, the word is devastated, knowing the effects of the occupation and, of course, the looting that has happened. Is any of this money going to go to families? Is any of it going to go to child soldiers? What do we know in terms of what the DRC does plan to do with this money? At least that's a guaranteed $65 million a year that in some way should find its way to helping the Congolese in all issues around the economy.
Yes, it should. It goes to the coffers of the DRC in Kinshasa. How much of that goes back to Eastern Congo, I don't know. I think I'm skeptical, frankly, if you haven't picked that up yet. But I think that President Tshisekedi probably is sincere in his intent to go back, to see that goes back, or at least much of it goes back. I think the reality is it's going to be difficult for most of that to go back to the Eastern Congo. They have their own interests there as well, and so I think I think your question hits in the challenge. Can they get that back to Eastern Congo, to the families? They're living in poverty. About 80% of the people in that area are in extreme poverty, as well as consistent fear, given that the militant groups are still at large.
All right, so this judgment, it raises some interesting questions because it also goes beyond Uganda and the DRC. A lot of people don't typically go to the IJC for monetary judgments, but it's not the first, most definitely. So the DRC initially asked for 11 billion, and that was, of course, changed to 325 million. And it's a mixed victory. On one hand, it's less than the 11 billion that they sued for. On the other hand, it's still a very significant award. But a lot of people have been asking, how do you calculate such damages and liability? How do you put a number to the families that were devastated, to the child soldiers that were created, to the deaths and the looting, to the raping and the pillage that happened? How do you calculate such?
I think it's almost impossible to calculate. You estimate, you can estimate property damage, you can estimate the environmental damage, but the cost on people's lives, not simply the 5 million that has been estimated and generally agreed that died as a result of that war, directly or indirectly. It's almost impossible to do that. I think those figures are figured up somewhere in the UN system or some economic system, but I think it's somewhat arbitrary, although I think 11 billion is a lot closer than 325 million to the damages that were done. Also, in praise of Uganda, they did agree to go to binding arbitration with the International Court of Justice, and they have honored, in the first year of 5, they have honored their agreement. But again, I think it's quite a bargain. But I think Uganda does deserve praise for saying yes, we're going to honor that agreement, and I think they get a lot out of it. President Tshisekedi allowed Uganda troops back in this past. For the first half of 2022, and what the implications of that remain to be seen. So they're getting quite a bit of value from that. I don't like to think of it that way, but I think that's the reality of the situation right now.
All right, and one final question, Stephen, before I let you go. The case is also significant because states turn to the court more frequently to try cases involving violations of international humanitarian laws and, of course, the laws of war. But it seems to be raising a broader question for a number of onlookers, and that happens around what happens when the courts that's designed to keep international peace starts assigning what could be termed as crippling damage awards to other parties. So if participation in international law practice carries some deep financial risk, do you think in the long run it might push countries, particularly those on the continent, away from the IJC, making them less willing to engage?
Well, yes, I think that, Uganda could have just as easily said, we're not going to pay it and move on. So I think that that's always a risk. And I think the tolls are too high. They're just simply not, they're going to ignore it and deny responsibility. So as I say, I do think that Uganda deserves some praise in this, against what I call an extraordinary financial bargain. They still deserve praise for accepting that. And what went on behind the scenes, we don't know that came to that figure. I think everyone agrees that it's low, but it can strain an official economy. And I think that Uganda needs to, again, bring their underground economy more in tow as well. But in part, you've got people supporting that.
All right, Stephen Hayes, thank you for your time today. Early wake up for you in Washington, D.C., but we definitely appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And it's a very interesting case that many people are watching closely. Uganda has paid the first installment of $65 million to the Democratic Republic of Congo. The first ask was 11 billion, but that was now moved to 325 million by the International Court of Justice. And this is for the damage and losses that Ugandan troops caused during occupations and war lasting from 1998 to 2003. For many in DRC, the question remains, how do you put a value to the loss of livelihoods, to the loss of lives, and to the loss of their families? We'll continue to see how this plays out. Again, looking to see what things stand and how things are playing out in Uganda, particularly from Ugandans on the other side of this conversation. You're watching Business Edge. We have international business headlines coming your way. We'll also still be talking about how to scale up and move your SME to the next level. And then, of course, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates. No surprise there. But what does it mean for the global economy? Those conversations coming after the break.